The Baton Rouge heat was brutal. The sidewalks cracked beneath the sun's weight, and the air smelled of river mud and gasoline, thick enough to taste. Roy stood beneath the drooping limbs of an old oak tree, his denim jacket stiff with grime. The collar of his shirt frayed like it had been chewed by time itself. He hadn't said a word all morning. Not to the church volunteers passing out bologna sandwiches wrapped in cling film. Not to the jogger who stepped around him without a glance. Not even to the man who tossed a quarter at his boots and muttered something about the, Lord. Roy just stood there, silent, weathered. His skin was sun-baked, his lips cracked, and his boots so worn that the soles flapped with every shuffle. He had once been someone, a plumber with a steady job, a wife, a home. Now he was just, hey man, or move along. The sidewalk shimmered in the heat, and hunger gnawed at his stomach like a second heartbeat. His last meal had been a stale gas station burrito, handed to him the night before by a sympathetic clerk. Even that felt like a week ago. Roy didn't like crowds, but today one had gathered across the street. Reporters adjusted their cameras. Locals set up folding chairs. Kids weaved through the scene on rusted bikes. Everyone was waiting for someone. The name echoed through the air like a radio station Roy couldn't quite tune into. Bill Gates. Roy didn't own a radio. No phone, no television. He hadn't followed the news in years. But from the bits he overheard, he's here about the foundation thing. He listens to people. He's not like the rest of them. Roy gathered that Gates wasn't just another rich guy dropping by. People said he cared. People said he saw things. Roy watched from his spot across the street, eyes squinting against the sunlight. When Gates finally arrived, Roy was surprised. No black SUVs. No crowd of security men. Just a tall, calm figure in a navy jacket. Crisp despite the heat. Walking with two aides and that unmistakable air of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Gates shook hands, smiled easily. He crouched to speak to a child, then paused to listen as an elderly woman spoke about broken sidewalks and water bills. Something about the way Gates leaned in when people talked, like he actually wanted to hear them, struck Roy. And then without thinking, Roy stepped off the curb. Each step felt heavier than the last. His boots dragged, soles flapping. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. People moved aside, some wrinkling their noses. A camera woman noticed and adjusted her lens. Sensing something unscripted was about to happen, Roy stopped about 6 feet from Gates. Close enough to be heard, far enough not to alarm anyone. Gates turned slowly, eyes locking on Roy's, not with pity, not with discomfort, but with real attention. Roy cleared his throat. His voice was sandpaper. "Sir, can you give me $1?" The moment Roy asked his question, everything seemed to stop. The heat, the crowd, the background noise, it all fell away. Across the street, a volunteer froze, sandwich in midair. A local reporter instinctively zoomed in. People stared, expecting Bill Gates to smile politely, step away, maybe gesture toward a shelter. Instead, Gates tilted his head slightly, as if trying to hear more clearly. His eyes locked onto Roy's, not with discomfort, not with pity, but with genuine attention. "What's your name?" he asked. Roy blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. For a moment, he almost forgot. "Roy," he said quietly, voice cracking from thirst and disbelief. Gates nodded. "Good to meet you, Roy. I'm Bill." No one around quite knew what to do. A reporter lowered her mic, puzzled. One of Gates's aides shifted uncertainly but didn't interfere. The moment felt fragile, like it could snap if anyone spoke too loudly. Gates took a breath, then turned to his assistant standing nearby. "Can you run across the street and grab Roy something hot? Real food, not just a sandwich. Something with meat, greens, potatoes. The works." The assistant nodded and hurried off. Roy was still standing in the same spot, confused. No one had ever responded like this. No one had ever answered his need without suspicion or distance. He didn't quite know what to do. "You want to sit down?" Gates asked gently, gesturing toward a nearby public bench half in the shade. "You look like you've been on your feet a while." Roy nodded slowly and shuffled toward the bench. His boots flapped with every step, and he walked with the kind of careful motion only those truly exhausted understood. He sat on the edge, rigid, as if unsure he was allowed. Gates joined him, his posture relaxed, elbows on knees, as though he were just another passerby chatting with a neighbor. "You from around here?" Roy rubbed his palms together nervously, glancing at the pavement. Baton Rouge, grew up near the river. Been moving around lately. You've had a rough time, Gates said, not as a question, but a gentle acknowledgement. Roy hesitated. Then he surprised himself by speaking. Used to be a plumber. Did decent work. Fixed schools, churches, homes. His voice drifted. Got hurt. Knee went bad. Couldn't lift like before. Work dried up. Lost the apartment. My wife tried to hang on, but she left about 3 years back. Gates didn't rush him. He didn't fill the silence. He just listened, truly listened. I haven't talked to her since, Roy added, voice quieter. She said she'd call when she settled in. Never did. Gates nodded slowly. Sometimes people leave because they don't know how to help. Not because they don't care. Roy looked away. He didn't want to cry. Not in front of all these people. Not in front of a man like Bill Gates. Roy sat on the bench in silence. The last of his mashed potatoes scraped from the container. The green beans had gone cold, but he didn't mind. They were real. The kind of food served on plates, not out of trash bins. The water bottle in his hand had condensation on the outside. A detail he couldn't remember noticing in years. Bill Gates stood up and stretched, brushing off his slacks. Travis, he said to his assistant, call the motel on North Street. The one that's clean and quiet. Get Roy a room for the week, shower, bed, AC. Travis blinked, surprised, then nodded and pulled out his phone. Roy turned slowly. A room? He asked, the words foreign in his mouth. Gates nodded like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Yeah, for you. For tonight. And the next few nights. Roy didn't know what to say. He just looked down at his hands. Hands that had once held wrenches, and pipe fittings and paychecks. Minutes later, Travis returned and confirmed the booking. Room 14, they're getting it ready now. Gates turned back to Roy. You'll have clean towels, fresh sheets. They've even got a little fridge in there. And tomorrow morning you'll get breakfast on me. Roy opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Not thanks. Not disbelief. Just a deep, invisible weight lifting, if only slightly. Travis handed him a small black duffel bag. There's a couple of shirts in here, he said. Pants, socks, a toothbrush, razor, oh, and a phone. Has just one number saved in it, Bill G. Roy took the bag slowly, as if it might disappear if he moved too fast. When they pulled up outside the motel, Roy stood in front of room 14 holding the key card like it was gold. His boots, caked with dust, dragged on the pavement as he opened the door and stepped inside. The air was cool, scented faintly with bleach and old carpet. The bed, simple. With a blue comforter and single pillow, looked like something out of a dream. He sat on the edge, unsure if he was allowed to touch anything. Then he peeled off his boots. The sock on his right foot stuck to a raw blister. He winced. Inside the duffel he found a new pair, white, thick, soft. He held them to his face, inhaling something he hadn't smelled in years, clean cotton. He didn't cry. He wanted to, but he didn't. Instead, he stood up, walked to the bathroom, and turned on the shower. The hot water stung. He let it burn. He washed away more than dirt that night. The grime that circled the drain wasn't just sweat and dust. It was the weight of years, the shame, the silence, the invisible cloak of being ignored. Afterward, he stood in front of the mirror. The man looking back was still rough, still sun-worn, still broken in places, but also cleaner, more human, more whole. He slipped on the new shirt, it fit. The joggers hugged his waist, held up by a drawstring. The phone sat on the bedside table. The screen still black, but it glowed faintly when touched. Roy woke before sunrise. Years of sleeping on sidewalks had trained his body to rise with the faintest sound or shift in light. But this morning, it wasn't cold air or a stranger's footsteps that stirred him. It was silence, a real, restful kind. The hum of the motel's air conditioner and the faint smell of bleach made him feel oddly safe. He sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand over the blanket, still tucked in, still his. At exactly 8 a.m., a knock came at the door. Roy hesitated, then opened it. Travis stood there holding a brown paper bag and a shoebox. Morning, Roy, he said. Got breakfast and something else. Roy stepped aside to let him in. On the small table, Travis placed the bag and box. Inside the bag was a warm breakfast sandwich, egg, sausage, cheese, and a bottle of orange juice still cold to the touch. In the box, a brand new pair of gray walking sneakers, size 10-1-2, the same size Roy had quietly mentioned the day before. He stared at them, almost afraid to touch. "These really for me?" he asked. Travis nodded. "Mr. Gates said to get what you needed, and we figured you could use something sturdy." Roy sat and slowly slid the shoes on. They fit perfectly. He stood up, shifting his weight from heel to toe. "Been a long time since shoes felt like this," he said, a small grin breaking through. They sat down at the table. Roy unwrapped his sandwich slowly this time, trying not to rush. Travis drank a coffee, watching him quietly. After a few bites, Roy spoke, almost to himself. "Didn't expect any of this. Wasn't looking for it. Just figured. Maybe someone would give me $1. Never thought he'd look at me like that." Travis nodded. "You asked for $1. What he gave you was a second chance." Roy looked up, eyes a little glassy. "You think people can really come back from this? From being like me?" Travis didn't hesitate. "I've seen it. The hardest part is believing you deserve it." Roy nodded slowly. Then after a pause, he whispered, "I might call my son, Caleb. He's 24 now. Haven't talked to him since he was 19. He didn't look up. Not today. But maybe soon. Just to hear his voice." Travis didn't respond right away. He just smiled gently. "I think he'd want to hear yours too." 3 days had passed since Roy first stepped into room 14. He still woke early, but not from fear. He woke because something inside him was shifting, something that had been numb for a very long time. Each morning, breakfast arrived like clockwork. Travis checked in daily, always with a few kind words and updates from Mr. Gates. The new clothes fit well. The shoes still looked brand new. The phone sat on the nightstand, fully charged. The name Bill G. still glowed at the top of the contact list. Roy hadn't touched it. Not until the morning of the 3rd day. He picked it up around 9 a.m., stared at the screen, then set it back down. 10 minutes later, he picked it up again. Then finally, without letting himself think too much, he dialed a number from memory. Caleb, his son. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Hello," Roy's voice caught. It was gravelly, hesitant. "Caleb, it's me. It's Dad." There was silence on the other end. Not angry, just stunned. "Dad?" Caleb said again, his voice cracking. "Yeah, Roy paused. "I'm okay. I'm alive. I wanted you to know that." They talked for 11 minutes. Not everything was fixed. Not even close. But Caleb said he was glad to hear Roy's voice. That he'd wondered. That he thought maybe Roy was gone. Roy told him about the motel. About the stranger who changed everything with a plate of food and a conversation. After the call, Roy sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not from sadness, but relief. He had made the call, and someone had answered. Later that afternoon, Bill Gates received an envelope at his office in Baton Rouge. There was no return address. Inside was a single handwritten letter on lined paper. "Mr. Gates, I called my boy today, Caleb, first time in 5 years. We talked for 11 minutes. It ain't fixed, but it's a start. I'm heading to Shreveport tomorrow. Buddy of mine has a couch and knows a guy at a maintenance job. You didn't just give me a bed. You gave me back my name. I ain't scared no more. Thank you. Roy." Bill read it slowly twice, then folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. Not for display, not for a press release, just to remember. Roy never became famous. His story didn't go viral, but something else happened. His story spread from mouth to mouth, in diners, at church steps, among people who'd seen him sleeping behind dumpsters. And Roy, now in Shreveport, woke up each day with a little more purpose. The sneakers still clean, the phone still charged. He didn't know if he'd ever be whole again. But for the first time in years, he believed he could try. And somewhere in another town, Bill Gates sat quietly at his desk, thinking about the Roys still out there, wondering who else might just need someone to ask their name. Because sometimes the smallest gestures don't just change a day, they change a life. 2 weeks had passed since Roy left Baton Rouge. He now lived in Shreveport, staying on an old friend's couch. Eddie, a retired janitor who still kept his coffee hot and his doors open. Eddie had known Roy back when he fixed pipes in the high school cafeteria. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "You're here now." That's enough. Roy's days were simple. He walked to the edge of town each morning, a borrowed toolkit in hand, asking around at garages, maintenance sheds, even the city water department. Most said no, some said maybe, but none said get out. That was progress. The sneakers Gates had bought him were still holding strong. They creaked slightly at the toes now, but they felt like armor. The phone stayed charged, tucked in the front pocket of his jacket. Roy hadn't called Bill again, but he thought about it sometimes, especially in the quiet moments. And there were more quiet moments now, good ones. Each night he scribbled notes in a cheap notebook Eddie had given him. Not poems, not stories, just names, places, memories, pieces of the man he used to be. One page read, "I fixed a leaky faucet today, it held." On the 15th morning, Roy received a call from an office park. A maintenance job had opened up part-time. Just sweeping, light repairs. Nothing big, but they remembered his name. He hung up the phone and stared at the wall. Then he laughed. Not loud, just enough. Roy stepped outside, the sky gray and honest. He didn't know where this was going. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was walking towards something, not away. And somewhere in another city, Bill Gates sat at a long table surrounded by planners, aides, and data reports. But for a brief moment, he paused, looked out the window, and smiled, just slightly without knowing why.